Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we have an incredible guest, beautiful accent from McKinney, Texas. Excuse me, Cindy Arledge, MBA. She has written multiple books on the Amazon best-selling charts. She's starting her own brand new industry, which I'm excited to talk more about. You're definitely going to want to hear from her. She also is hyper-focused on helping people really create a meaningful legacy, which is why when I had the opportunity to have her on, I was like, absolutely, we need more people who are talking about this. I like interviewing people from all different walks of life, but I get extra little excited and juiced up when it's talking specifically about legacy, like our podcast is. So author of many books, CEO of the North Texas Family Enterprise Center, and she is the family matriarch, which is pretty impressive. And not impressive, but more impressive than that she is that she's aware of it and she's doing her role there. And I think everybody has that same ability, and you can choose into that identity, but it's something you have to choose into. So I love that you've chosen into yours. But let's get into it. I want to hear your story, your backstory, how you got to where you are, and we got to learn more about this new industry that we're creating.
Well, Samuel, thank you for having me here. I am so excited because, legacy is such a big word. Like, even to define legacy, we could spend a whole show on just defining legacy, right? And what I like, and let me just tell you my story. My parents passed away 8 months apart in 2005. And even though they had all the legal documents, Dad had done almost everything that the attorney had told him to do. And they had gone from being born in the Depression, dirt poor when they got married, had 4 children in 9 years. By the time they passed away, they'd been married 55 years and left a $10 million estate, which is quite a financial accomplishment. The flip side of that is that oftentimes entrepreneurs, especially like my dad that grew up really, really poor, and everything that they did, they built on their own, let some of the relationships slide a little bit, right? And so we were a dysfunctional family at best. But I was totally unprepared for what happened after my mom and dad passed away. We had lawsuits filed within the family. We couldn't meet without being in a room full of attorneys. I'm the baby with 3 older brothers, and I didn't know that I had this expectation that my family would be there for me. I mean, we go through life with these expectations that we don't even know that we have until they're not met. And oftentimes we don't even realize that our dissatisfaction with life has to do with the fact that we had an expectation that's not being met. So I went into what's called the dark night of the soul. And honestly, I asked God, what did I do to deserve this? What do you want me to learn? What do you want me to do differently? And I spent years answering those 3 questions. And what I discovered is that I didn't do anything to deserve it. In fact, everything that had happened to me was done for me, not to me. The second thing that I learned was, life is what you make of it. And so I created this formula for living that I called GRIP Life. And it was intentionally misspelled to be GRIPP, for gratefully, responsibly, intentionally pursuing purpose. And I watched the movie The Way, and I thought, wow, that's really neat. The Way is a movie with Martin Sheen, Emilio Estevez, about a 500-mile pilgrimage across Europe that all roads lead to Santiago, Spain. And then I watched a Shirley MacLaine interview, and she had done it in her 60s. And at the time, I was younger than that. I thought, I'll go to Spain I'll test my formula for living, see if it works. And when it does, I'll come back, I'll write a book, and I'll share this formula for living to help other people get out of that dark night of the soul. So that's what I did. I gave my husband a financial power of attorney. I cleared my schedule for 45 days. I'd never been to Europe before. I flew by myself and made my way to Saint Jean, France, walked across the Pyrenees, and walked 500 miles with plantar fasciitis before I left, and got home and argued with God for about 10 months about what I should or should not put in that book. And in the process, I was called to start this new industry to help other families avoid what we had gone through. And quit arguing with God, got 2 more books published that year. I've got a total of 4 of them out. And so my goal is to help families create legacies from one generation to the next. And by legacy, I mean more than just money. It's really a system for allowing everybody in the family to have the opportunity to share their gifts and talents to meet the world's needs. So that's what happened.
That is incredible. I love it. So I want to dig into this a little bit. A lot bit. We're going to have a lively conversation, I'm sure. So but what the listeners know, but you may not, is I'm actually the 7th of 11 children. And we were raised in what I would consider poverty, not Great Depression poverty, obviously, but what I would consider poverty. And all of us siblings and children have, for the most part, we're all doing fairly well from a income and professional standpoint out of that. So there's a great benefit in that. Before your parents died, and how old were they when they died? If you don't mind.
They were really very young. Dad passed away the day after his birthday when he was 76, and my mom was 75. So, and since I'm 62 and my husband's 73, that's really young.
I was just going to say that. Your perspective of old and young changes as you begin to gain more years of experience in life. You're like, oh, wow, I'm still young, right? And what's crazy, again, I am still young, even younger than you. I'm half your age, right? I'm only 29. So, but when you think about that, when I think back to what I was at 12 years old or now, it's like, man, everything seemed like such a big deal because I only had 12 years of experience. Now that I have 30 years or almost 30 years of experience, the small blips, they just don't seem as bad because I don't get as worked up about stuff because I'm like, yeah, I've seen so much at this point. It's fine. And then I talk to people who have even more experience. They've seen even more. And so it really levels out life a lot. But inside, I told my wife this the other day. Inside, even though I'm 29 years old or however old I am, I don't actually know, but somewhere on there, I still feel like a 13-year-old boy. Like I don't feel any older other than my body's breaking down, right? And that sounds bad for a 30-year-old, but I started working full-time when I was 11 and at hard labor. And so my body is aging faster than a normal body. And haven't done what I need to do to keep it up. But as your parents died, what was your relationship before that? Because understandable, when it was growing, it was a stress relationship, but did your relationship with your siblings and your parents, did that get better as they got older, or was it always stressed?
Well, it came and went. Nothing's linear, right? Sure. And we had a family-owned business, and you have to admire my dad's, you have to understand that today's world's a different world. So his company name was Arledge and Sons Motor Company. Mm-hmm. So as the only daughter, I wasn't even the picture. And yet at the end of the day, typically caregiving will fall on the daughter or the person that's closest to the parents in proximity of geographics, right? So as the only daughter, I was more involved with taking care of my mom and dad than my brothers were. And I actually worked for them on and off. And so as far as the sibling relationships go, there was times that it was good and there was times that it was bad. And my father, I don't ever really remember him as being sick, but he had his first bypass surgery when he was 40 years old. And he had a second bypass when he was 60, and he had prostate cancer and, just all kinds of things. But his love of life, I don't remember him being ill. So when I was in the 7th grade, he almost died. He was only the 1,500th person to have open heart surgery in Dallas, Texas in the 70s. That's unheard of. And so when there's just some cracks that happen in the family, that my father put some boundaries up with his sons, at different times. And so, unfortunately, when he passed away, he had written two of my brothers out of his will. That's how, was not happy. And I'm not saying that's the right way to do things, but it caused a rift between him and the boys. But then that rift continued between some of the siblings that, even though they inherited under my mom, because she is Alzheimer's patient, she couldn't change her will. So they still inherited. And that's where, the misconception that money creates problems, the problems are already there.
Right. I think that's the key. And that's what I want to dig into is, because what my story is, and like why I do what I do is that my family had some issues and had a lot of great things. I got so much great things, and then had some issues, as poverty can drive some issues. And this goes back to kind of your parents. They're raised in the Great Depression. There's a certain level of callousness to feeling, or like, I just don't care about how bad you think your life is, because it's not that. Like, there's a certain level of like, I don't buy it, get over it, moving on, which doesn't actually help a parent-child relationship. It's something that's difficult for me. So grateful for my wife to help me, like, well, your son might be feeling rejected right now. I'm like, well, I don't care. I felt rejected before and I'm alive, right? So it's little things like that that callousness comes due to poverty. So I went to school for neuropsychology to figure out, where is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is abuse happening? Why is anxiety, depression, divorce? And you could have divorce. They don't call it divorce when the parent disowns their child. They call it disowning, but it's still divorce of a nature. And why is this happening? And then where is it most common? And it's most common in low-income households, but it still happens in high-income households. Just generally, they have the money and the resources to get the help they need. But one thing you said was key, is they did almost everything they were told to do.
Yep. And so let's come back to this, but I'd like to say something about what you just said, because as an author, because I've read your book and thank you for writing it. I really enjoyed it. I love your 9 pillars of, legacy. There's a lot of research that goes into writing a book. And one of the research that I did was on the mindset of money, because so many people are confused about money, and as well they should be. When I really dug into this with my mom and dad, my dad used money control, my mom used money to love. And so when they passed away, it was like money makes you more of what you are. So the more money you get, it expands that relationship with it. And so I realized I was very confused about money. And so I did the research, and what I discovered, and I think this is what happened to my father, when he started making money, he had a poverty mindset. Mm-hmm. Then there's a middle class mindset. Then there's a wealthy mindset. And the research that I was doing was had to do with school kids. And this psychologist has done all kinds of research on those 3. But what she didn't even talk about, and this is where I go with families, and it may resonate with you, is a consciousness mindset. Mm-hmm. And so to give you an example, poverty mindset of food is there enough to eat? Right? Yep. Poverty mindset of middle class is, does it taste good? A mindset of wealth is, was it displayed pretty? And then the mindset of consciousness is this nutritious? Mm-hmm. So I work with families to get to a consciousness level. So lots of times people make money, but they drag that poverty mindset with them.
Absolutely.
And yeah. And then again, flip to the wealth mindset, right? I think we see this in a lot of people who get sudden wealth. They go from the poverty mindset to, I've got to have a $9,000 watch and a $3 million car. They lose their mind in the wealthy mindset of how does it look to be wealthy?
So I would, because I do a lot of, when I speak on stage, I talk a lot about this. I would argue that the wealthy people who blow their money are still in the poverty mindset. Right?
Absolutely.
And you can have, and this is what people don't understand. I made a comment. I posted something on my Facebook wall. I haven't ever taken it down because I like it. But I got a lot of flack from my mother. My mother is like, we had an argument on Facebook. But, and this sounds, you can look at this whatever way you want, but I think poverty is more of a mental illness than it is anything else. At the very least, it's a disability, right? It's a lack of ability to think differently in their current state. Now, it doesn't mean that if they were trained to do something and gained more ability, they couldn't change. But in the current state, they have at least a poverty disability. And no matter how much money you give that disability or dump on that disability, it's still a disability. And unless there's education, teaching somebody and demonstrating and showing and helping them go from that poverty disability to a consciousness disability, then there's not going to be a change. And you can go have lots of money. You can be poverty rich. You can be poverty middle class. You can be poverty poor. But it's poverty poor. Poverty is not indicative of money in my mind. It's a mindset rather than a status of wealth. But a lot of people view poverty as a status of wealth. And so in our country, the solution to the war on poverty is dump more money. It has nothing to do with money. Some of the wealthiest people I know don't make very much money annually, and they have more money.
And to your point, there's two aspects of being able to keep money, right? There's the emotional mindset piece of it, and then there's technical skills. So anybody can learn the technical skills, but if you don't have the mindset or the consciousness of it, you'll still lose it, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you don't have the technical skills, but you've got consciousness, you've got people that don't have, they're still wealthy, but they don't have money in the bank. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you said that, I agree with, I think it even extends more than just money. Like if you've got a poverty mindset, it affects your relationship. It affects how you feel about time. Like if you wake up in the morning and you wake up and you say, I don't have enough time to get done the things I need to do today, you're in a poverty mindset.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why I want to have the greater conversation, because legacy in my mind, it's not about money. A legacy in my mind is how are you going to be remembered? Now, money may play into that equation. I'm not saying that money is completely absent of that equation, but legacy is not necessarily a financial conversation. It's a lifestyle way of being, and to what you're going to share, hopefully, it's also about what are you passing down and how are you setting up the next generations to continue to develop and build upon what you built, right? So it's a movement almost rather than a financial status.
Absolutely. And I ask my clients 3 questions. I ask them, number 1, how do you want to experience life? Because if you want to leave a legacy, you have to live a legacy, right? I mean, absolutely. Yeah. And so the second question is, what impact do you want to make? Because you don't have to die to make a huge impact. I mean, really, I think one of the biggest impact that we can have is just to be kind to people. Literally, kindness is an amazing impact to have. And then the third question I ask is, how do you want to be remembered? Now, the challenge that I found with these 3 questions is that, I've been living this as a lifestyle now for several years, is that there's times that how I want to experience life is in conflict with how I want to be remembered.
Oh, me too. Every day. Well, I don't have every day, but often, and I have to choose the higher of the 2 values.
Right. And so, because how you want to experience life, oftentimes it can be, I want to be a benefit to my family, right? And I'm not going to be a full-time babysitter. I mean, I've got 5 grandkids. I love them to death. And, I'm actually working on their legacy. They just don't know it. Right. Huh. And I have really pretty in-depth, amazing conversations from 10-year-old to, the 3-year-old, he's still not quite there yet, but the 5-year-old I learn from her every day. Right. So if the kids need my help, there's times I have to say no, which I'm risking them thinking or remembering me as mom was always working, to fulfilling the mission that I came here to fulfill that not everybody around me quite fully understands.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's discipline 101, which is like, it's hard when you think of, okay, what's more important to me? Do I instill a legacy into somebody? Because my wife and I have this conversation, and for almost anytime discipline comes up, because she was raised different, and it's good what she does. There's a ton of value in having a more loving, caring experience, but I don't want to see that overtake and then have people scared of trying and failing. So it's like, I'll sit there and argue with my kid and force them to do something, or at least not help them until they try it, which causes you're mean, I hope you never exist, and you run away and all this stuff. But there's that value exchange of like, well, the long-term value is this. The short-term downside is I got to argue with my kid. I don't want to argue with my kid. But the long-term value is they're going to learn a hard lesson. And that's the long-term lesson is more important than the short-term flare-up. And it's a constant battle of that conversation in every area of your life. And money especially. Hey, you want good food now, or you want to have money in retirement, but are you living your way in accordance with that? And sometimes in certain days, the answer is, you know what, I'd rather eat the hamburger at Burger King than have an extra $100 in retirement. Cool. Do it then. I don't care what you do with your money. But are you even asking yourself that question? And do you know what question to ask yourself is crucial? And that's where a lot of people, I talked to what's her name? Another lady I had on my podcast. She was an anthropologist. She studied anthropology. And what her specific area that she studied was the language patterns. Mm. And like people who are raised in poverty, they don't actually have the right words to be conscious or wealthy or even middle class. So it's not necessarily they can't do it. They're perfectly capable, but they don't have the right resources in language. They don't know the right language, the right questions to ask to even take to the next step. And it's like, that's so crazy that's a poverty divide in anthropology, is they just don't actually know the right words to ask. Like, that's crazy.
Well, and to your point, there in that study I was telling you about, middle-class children have been read to and know more words by the time they go to kindergarten than adults living in poverty, because they're not reading. So, you had mentioned earlier about, you could throw a lot of money to people and they still have that poverty mindset. It won't change anything. And that's where I feel like to really look at the cause and effect of what's like, dig into what the real cause is. All right. Yeah. I just finished reading an amazing book. It's about the pack horse librarians from Kentucky from the 1930s. And I did not know that there was families in Kentucky that actually were blue. They had recessive genes. Ended up, a guy from France came here, married a woman. They both had this recessive gene, and their 4 of 7 children were actually blue skinned. Wow. And they were considered colored. And it's a fascinating book. It's a historical fiction, but the idea behind this is that these women were taking books and literature up the hills of Kentucky to these families that couldn't even eat, but it transformed their lives when they could read and get greater insight and get more than what they knew from their little holler in Kentucky. So education, wisdom, words, all of these are of tremendous value. And to your point, I think more important than money.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's a big reason why I've devoted my life. I studied neuropsychology, found that I was like, oh, I could go to years of school to try and repair this thing that should never be broken. Or I could completely shift, go into left field. You don't see like psychologists going into finance very often. But I was like, well, I can go there, or I can go and just simply teach people the language of money and how it actually works. And that's a huge skill. What you're doing is, hey, I had the same problem, the avoidance of pain. I'm going to call it the avoidance of pain, but for you, it's like, how do I help other people not go through the pain that I went through, which led you to, hey, how do you actually structure legally to a level and in the family, structure something that's being passed on that generates or at least fosters greater love and harmony in a family rather than more discord.
Well, and I've got 3 different stages I call what I do legacy planning, because it is an industry that exists, but it's actually called the family office industry, and you have to have like 500 million to get access to it. And, I had shared with you, that after my mom and dad passed away, I was so confused. And so I started really studying money. And the statistics were staggering for me. 70% of families lose wealth when someone in the family dies. 7 out of 10 families lose wealth. Well, I found out we were normal. Congratulations. We were one of the, yay.
The worst indictment ever. You're normal.
And then I started studying into it, even deeper, and realized let's say less than 10% of families are able to keep wealth in the family past the third generation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that means for me, and this is where it really struck me, I had watched my mom and dad work so hard their entire life to build this amazing financial gift. And my dad was so proud. He really wanted to build this empire to help his grandkids. But they passed away before my grandchildren were born. And so based on the statistics, the wealth that my parents created would be gone before my grandchildren would be able to have any benefit from it at all. And that really struck me. And I was like, no, that is not going to happen. So that's what caused me to start this industry. But what I discovered in the family office and why I call it legacy planning is because it's more than the money. It's the family history. It's the family story. There's some good stories and some not so good stories, but they're still who you are, right? And you can learn from the stories that you would never want to repeat, right? And so I created this 3-stage process, and part of it is, if you could imagine, Samuel, having a curriculum that would enable each of, I don't know how many children do you have?
2. I got 2 boys.
2 boys. And if you have more, because I'm a grandma, I'm always wanting more, right?
Yeah, my parents are too.
That's why I don't babysit, but I host a cousin's night once a month so I can have a date night for my daughters with their husbands. And I got a grandkid out of it last year. So a couple years ago. So it works, but I digress. The idea of being able to help that child discover what their genius is at a very early age, because they all have different genius. I mean, it's so fascinating as a grandmother to not have to be taking care of them on a day-to-day basis, to really appreciate that they come out entirely different and not have to help them in the trenches navigate those, the personality challenges that I think eventually become their strengths, but when they're young children, can be hard to deal with as a parent. But it's very evident as a grandparent that they are born with gifts and talents. But imagine having a curriculum that each of them get a chance to develop that to meet the world's needs and utilizing who they are without having to change themselves.
Yeah, I would think that would be every parent's dream, at least, because I think most parents, I do know some parents I've run into that they honestly don't want their kids to outperform them. And they're like hyper competitive with their own children. I'm like, that's weird to me, but okay, whatever you want to do. But yeah, I think most parents, they want to have been a stepping stone so their children could achieve more, whatever that looks like. And there's a different definition of achievement for each individual, which is kind of part of life. But I think that would be awesome to have a curriculum where they can help build that. So is that what you've then created?
Well, that's a piece of it. So when I sit down, like if I sat down with you and your wife, we would just do a checklist, like what skills do you think every human being needs to be successful? And it might be balance checkbook, change a tire.
Yeah.
Be kind to somebody. I mean, you and your wife would come up with this unique list of what you think it takes to be a success. And I'm curious. I mean, what's your list?
My list is my core values. So, and it's really simple. I think if you are living a life as close to integrity as possible, so you do what you say you're going to do. I don't think that full integrity ever really exists in any real way. I think there's too many outside elements. So as long as you're crossing that integrity line as frequently as possible, I think you're winning. That's my opinion. Gratitude. I think if you can learn to just simply learn to be grateful. You said, hey, I thought a lot of stuff happened to me. What I found is it all happened for me. I feel the same way. When I was going through my life, I was like, dude, life cannot get much worse than it is right now. And I felt like the world was against me and my parents were against me and my siblings were against, like, I felt like everything was against me. Now, having come out the other side of it, I'm just so grateful for every experience, like good, the quote unquote good, the bad, whatever. I'm just grateful that it's happening. Like, I'm so grateful I'm alive to experience this. I'm grateful I got to learn. I've learned to live in a mindset of gratefulness, in a state of gratefulness. So I think that's crucial. And then the last is, I label it candor because it's an easy word, but I think that the ability to act based on what you feel is right without being, I'm going to use the word dictated to rather than influence, because I don't think influence is necessarily bad when somebody else has influence on you of like what an action that would serve you versus not serve you is. I don't think that the mere influence is bad. But there's a lot of people who live in fear, or they're addicted already to the approval of others. So they're only acting and behaving in ways that they perceive will be an approval. And because of that, then they end up not actually performing what they want inside. Their real dreams inside, they don't even share them a lot of times because they think, I wouldn't get accepted, and acceptance is more important than my dreams. And I disagree with that. I think that you as an individual have these God-given talents, their genius, whatever it is, and nobody else has it. But if we're stuck in a world where becoming or complying or being normal, right, the worst time minute ever, if being normal is the goal, there's a problem in my mind. So I think I label it as candor so I can say what I want, do what I want, whatever. But really it's, are you an independent individual and thinking for yourself? Or are you so held captive by other people's beliefs that's all you're doing, right? Like, are you living your life on somebody else's terms or on your terms? And I think independence in that regard is crucial. And that's all forms: financial, emotional, relationship. Like when I married my wife, when I was dating my wife, this didn't go over well. I mean, you probably would know this. As an 22-year-old boy, I didn't know this well, but I didn't care at the same time. So, but I would tell girls when I was dating, one, I tell people that I love them because I do. I think love is a universal thing, and it has nothing to do with romantics or sexual natures or anything. It's just I love people. But I told her, well, she's like, well, if you love me, then and you love all these other people, that's not very good, you know? And I was like, look, I don't need you to love me for me to love me. Like, I will love myself more than enough for the both of us, right? So like, if you decide at some point in our relationship that you no longer want to continue to be in a relationship, I will feel bad for a little bit, but I'm going to move on because I love myself so much that you can, I want you on the ride with me, but if you don't want on the ride, I'm not going to keep you here. If you tell me no, you're not interested in moving our relationship forward, I won't be calling you again. Like when you tell people that on the first or second date, it really is like, who the heck is this guy? Well, I was a guy who knew what I wanted, and those are my boundaries. And I also respect that if you tell me no, you're not interested, I respect that.
And all of those are great values. And what's fascinating is, you know, from as a grandmother, to teach your kids how to love themselves enough to stay on their own path is really one of the greatest keys that you can give them, right? But there's more. You know, one of the things that people forget when they think about wealth, right? They only think about money, and they don't understand that there's all kinds of different assets. There's social, right? There's social capital.
Way more valuable than
right.
money.
There is intellectual capital. There's spiritual capital. You know, there's what I call family capital. And that is where the family has harmony. Because when you have a family that has harmony, this is one of the second stages that I do, is to create a system to transfer the wealth kind of peacefully, right? Most people don't know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s family were in a civil lawsuit for almost 50 years over how to dispose of his Bible and his Peace Prize. So let that just sink in for a minute, right? 48 years, they fought over his Peace Prize and his Bible. Crazy. So family harmony is worth something, and it doesn't happen by accident. So, the second stage that we do is like creating a purpose for money and create family harmony and this, ability to understand the different assets and steward them, right? Because if I had a choice of being poor or having lots of money, I'm going to take money because money gives me choices. Mm-hmm. I don't see it as it's not my self-esteem. If I were to lose it all, for me, the idea of financial freedom is having the confidence to know that if I lost everything, I could go get it again. Mm-hmm. Right?
Completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then the third stage of it is to create a system and a structure to make decisions past the third generation. So think about it. My mom and dad were from $0 to $10 million. If they need to make a decision about money, dad usually made it, but mom had her say so, right? Kind of like the big fat Greek wedding. She'd give an idea and he'd think it was his, and she's the one that gave it to. Oh, that's a great idea, Janice. So, technically, if things had been set up well, when the money had passed or the wealth had passed to me and my brothers, we would have had a partnership. We would have been trained on how to make decisions. We could have kept that wealth together. We could have grown it. We would have had a system for making decisions between the four of us. Mm-hmm. And then we would have set up the next framework where the 9 grandchildren of my mom and dad would have been able to make decisions and grow that wealth, steward that wealth for every generation going forward. So one of the things that we do, because I call it the rabbit effect. Technically, your family should grow every generation. I mean, you came from a family of, you said 11?
11. Yeah.
And if all of them had 10 kids, you would have exponential growth. But even if they all just had 2, right? And then all those 2, you have the rabbit effect in a family. And that's one of the ways that families run out of wealth, because they've divvied up the money. Like mom and dad, they actually split it up 5 ways. They split it up between my 4 brothers and then had a 5th pot for the grandkids. And, but that was a mistake, another show, but it dilutes what you can do with it. And so when you can do this legacy piece and teach families how to have harmony, teach them how to make decisions, teach them how to work together for a common good, put their wealth to purpose. We talked about the consciousness. Families that are only concentrating on making money for themselves lose it. If you can't use your money to make the world a better place, it goes back to that abundance versus scarcity mindset. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, completely agree. And I think that this is an interesting conversation. I'm going to bring up my book for a second, because I know that you've written lots of books. We mentioned earlier that it's writing a book is like having a baby. For some people, so here's my challenge in writing books. Okay, I have 2 challenges in writing books, and from my experience, one that I've had is I'm not that I want to write things in my voice, and my voice doesn't translate to English on written English very well because of the way I pause, I intonate and things. So when you actually grammatically edit something to where you can only say it in Sam's voice, people get very confused about it and they have to read it 10 times until they're like, oh yeah, this is how Sam's supposed to say it. So one of the ideas that I have for a book, do you like music, or are you a singer? Do you actually know how to read music? Singing?
If I were to sing, everybody would leave your show. I mean, I sing so bad. My children used to ask me not to sing to them. Okay. But I love music, and I listen to music quite a bit, actually. So
good. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to write a book that has every line, every word is actually, from a musical perspective, dynamically annotated so that they know exactly how they're supposed to say what I'm saying, from a musical perspective. So mezzo forte, pianissimo, all of it. I want to really get in there so they know how to read the book, so they get the full impact and intent. So they have to. The reason is information's great, experiences are way better. Mm-hmm. And so when you write a book, you're often transferring information. Information generally is emotionless. Now, sometimes because of the connection, that of your personal experiences, when you're reading certain information, it causes an emotional reaction. And that's generally isolated to somebody who's had similar experiences. Somebody who has never experienced it, they're going to read it and be like, I don't really care. And they're going to move on. So it's not a duplicatable experience transfer. And so when I'm writing books, I really have done my best to transfer experiences rather than transfer information. Because I think another belief of Sam's, most of the information that's going to help you go to the next level is already inside of you. Mm-hmm. But you may not know the right questions to ask to get it out of you. And so when I've written my books, especially the one that you read, there's like a short anecdotal story introducing a concept, but then there's the 3 questions of taking the next step to actually experience what it is I'm talking about. In my experience, okay, now I'm going to share my experience of when I hear people have read my book. Most of the time, they don't go through the experience. They read the words, they accept the transfer of information, they don't do the experience. So then they lose 90% of the value that was ideally to be transferred. So I'm curious, how have you seen in your own writing material to transfer an experience more efficiently?
Well, I think that's really a great question. Every book's been different. So my first book was about my 500-mile walk. And I'm a pretty humorous person. Before COVID and I used to do a little stand-up comedy to work on my public speaking skills.
Okay. Yeah, most of my public speaking is all public stand-up comedy, and I try and teach a few lessons in a long comedy skit. So.
Yeah, and people love to laugh, right? And my topics are death, aging, and money. I can clear a room like that. Right. And so my first book was all about my experiences, but it has humor. I put some pictures in there, so I really think that expands the experience when you can actually see a picture. But when I did the walk, I took pictures every day and I journaled every night. So when I wrote the book, I looked at the pictures, I read my journal, I lit a candle. So what do you want me to say? And then I argued for a really long time. And then I lost the argument and I wrote what I was supposed to write, right? And so I feel like because of the humor, the attention to details, that book really is a great experience because I take people with me day by day what I experience. Even getting locked in a bar in a bathroom and accidentally breaking into a ham factory to use the restroom. And so describing the smells and so that book is very experiential. In my second book, The Curse of Inheritance, I tell my story, and I told it. There was no villains. There's no villains in my story.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No.
Everybody was doing what they thought was best at the time with the emotional bandwidth and what they had available to them. So there's not a villain in my story. So that one was, and the purpose of writing that book was, I call it kind of the negative side, like really sharing. There's some questionnaires in there, like, answer these questions and you can rank yourself and really getting in describing different levels of preparedness so you can understand where you fit in, right? Mm-hmm. The next book I wrote, which was The Legacy Family Way, it was kind of the opposite of the problem. It's like, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution. And it's not a big thick book, but it again has lots of stories, anecdotes. I feel like the reader can see themselves there. And then the last book I wrote so far, I've got a dozen more in my head, sure, again, has checklists and stories. And I think that's, really important for people I think the story's more powerful than the words. Sure. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've used checklists to kind of check for lack of a better word, check for understanding for your readers to kind of make sure that they're keeping up pace with what's actually being said and whether they're missing something or actually, because they do this in school, right? They test your reading retention. And for most people, they can retain because they've been trained as students to retain information long enough to regurgitate it. But then when it comes down to actually thinking about your thinking, or thinking about why, like, because I answered a list of like the things that I think are the most important to pass on. The really cool, fun things, and I'm sure you've experienced this when you're helping clients, is, well, why? Why is that important to you? Because that's when the stories come out. And then you listen to that story and you're like, that's so fascinating. Why? Again. And then why? And you go 7 whys deep. That's when you really get experience the feelings of somebody else's experience. So I didn't put 7 whys. I put 3 questions in my book. Who are in each of the pillars, who are the people? And some people say, oh, well, it's the people at work, or so I think I need to edit the book to be like, write down their names, right? Because I want people to get the person who's the hater. Who are your haters? Who are the people directly that you know of that either don't want you to succeed or don't believe that you can succeed? There's people in everybody's life who have in that position. So who are they? Like, give their names, their phone numbers, their addresses, like make it real. You're going to write these people a letter. Who are they? How will their life be better when you succeed? Like, let's say I work with you, Cindy, and we actually create this legacy plan that's multi-generational. How are the people in my life today or in multiple generations, how is their life specifically going to be better when I take these actions and I become successful than if I don't? If I don't create my legacy, how is it going to differ than if I do create my legacy? And then the last question on every one of them is, what is my action step? What can I do today to move closer to that? And if somebody's asking themselves those questions, then they're going to get the experience of recognition of who believes in them, who doesn't believe in them, but all positively, because the people who don't believe in you, right? There's no villains. It's, well, how is this still going to be a labor of love for even the people who don't? The people who are suing my siblings, who are suing me over my parents' money, whatever, how can I still maintain love and harmony and positivity with them and understand where they're coming from? And how will they be better off if I continue to live my legacy? Because I can't let their legacy influence mine. But if I live mine, how will they be better off? So anyways, I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, gosh, there's a lot of questions. So
I know. You don't have to do those questions on here right now. I'm just
that's okay. So
experience transfer.
One of the things that I believe is that family is the smallest economic unit of society.
Sure, absolutely.
And I believe that 2020 showed us that we have a lot of weak economic families in our country, and that the weak economic families lead to weak communities and weak nations and war. So I think that world peace lies in your hands of creating a strong economic unit for your family that's a full-bodied legacy, so that you can contribute to your community, so that you can contribute to the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that sounds like so far-fetched, but world peace lies on every one of us living our legacy to the fullest.
Yeah, I agree. And the big question is, how do you then, if you go meet with Cindy, she helps you answer this, right? But in each of your who are listening, the question to ask yourself is, what are you doing today to strengthen that economic unit of the family? For me, the biggest thing that I had to shift in my mindset, and I think my parents did a good job at helping. Like, my parents had so many good things. We had family meetings, which were like family board meetings, every Sunday for like 4 or 5 hours. And I hated every minute of it because, like, this is so boring. We'd go over acknowledgments, the recognition part of your business. We would go over the budget. We would go over what we're going to have for dinner, so we were clear there. We would go over agenda items, the areas of our family unit that weren't working up to par, and how are we going to fix it? What are the tasks that need to be completed this week, and who's being assigned to them? What's the follow-up system? And like what my parents created on a weekly basis, they were running official board meetings with a bunch of rowdy teenagers or kids. Like, it's absolutely incredible to me, and they deserve all the love and respect that they get. But viewing yourself as the CEO of your organization, the family organization, is, I think, crucial in start like that identity shift for me. That was what really stepped me into, okay, my family's not just a family. What are our bylaws? What are our, who's in charge of taking out the trash? You know, it sounds dumb, but like, is it Sam's job to remind the kids to take out the trash? I don't want that responsibility. So we've got to find a way for them to take ownership of taking out the trash, right? And them to be excited about taking that ownership. There's got to be a buy-in for them to be, and so it's very interesting when you start thinking of your life as a CEO rather than a mom or a dad, because you make decisions differently as a CEO than as a parent, in my experience.
Well, and so to answer your question, what I've done and what I've discovered is that there's 9 conditions that if a family answers any of the questions no, I know they're going to have problems in the future. And so there's 2 things that you said that are so fascinating to me, because what your parents did is what one of the things that I recommend families do, which is to have family meetings with guiding principles. And, you know, that's that development that we were talking about, because your parents developed you through their actions of having a board meeting. And I suspect you had some input, right?
Oh yeah, we all did. And we had our family mission statement that we always, like, we would recite our family mission statement. And many times it was like, oh, you want to go, it's a family, right? So it's like, oh, when there's 11 kids and your parents are not wealthy, then you got to find ways to make money. So, okay, you want to go out and have a family dinner somewhere at Golden Corral or whatever. Well, how are we going to make this happen? Here's the budget. Here's how much we don't have money for it. This is how much money we need. This is how much the electricity costs. This is how much the water costs. This is how much everything. Are we all willing to have not use the AC as much? Instead of keeping it at 80, what if we keep it at 84 or 85? Instead of leaving the lights on, can everybody take ownership of turning the lights off? If everything goes right, we'll see where we're at the end of the month. And if we've increased our bottom line enough, then we'll go have our reward. Like that was, and every kid got a chance, I think, to plan on that and choose. Here's the list of stuff that gets done or needs to be done. Who's willing to commit to what part of the list? Oh, I choose to do that. So anyways, it was very participative.
And so that's what we help families do. I mean, that's one of the things we actually set up a plan and a budget and help them do that, because not everybody has that experience that you had, Samuel. Yeah. And yours was, from what you're saying, born out of poverty. Can you imagine what it would be like to come from a series of abundance? And the question that you ask your kids every week is, you know, who do we want to help to make the world a better? You know, how are we going to measure the impact that we're going to make? And one of the things that we did, my grandson for his birthday wanted to offer a meal for the Samaritan Inn, which was a homeless shelter in McKinney. And so he raised all the money and the family went and we, served a meal. And then afterwards I sat down with him and I said, okay, how many people did we serve? It was about 80. How much did it cost? About 300. I made him figure out how much dollar it cost to feed every person. And then I said, if we were to do that at McDonald's, and so he did the math and he was able to see that by working with a nonprofit, we were able to have a bigger impact with our wealth than having to go buy, Whataburger. So there's a lot of richness that you can have with multi-generational. You've got to have the guiding principles in place. And one of the biggest areas that I see families, and that's why I've got the 9 questions. And I don't know if now's the time, but I've got it free. Anybody can go take the 9-question risk audit. It's at www.legacyriskaudit.com. You can download your copy, it's maybe 4 minutes. It's a yes or no. And I tell people, like, what's a maybe? I said, if it's a maybe, it's a no.
Yep. It's not a hell yes, it's a hell no.
Yeah. And then from there, we can create a strategic plan and figure out, because turning those no's into yeses can transform your life. And I will tell you, how we do it on time, because I think you and I could stay here forever.
Yeah, no, we got to wrap it up soon, but you share what you want to. Yeah.
Well, I see several billion and trillion dollar challenges in our economy because families aren't basically taking care of business. And unfortunately, people your age have a storm coming towards them that if your parents need help, most likely someone from the family is going to have to take off work and take care of them, and may even have to pitch in and take care of their medical care. And there is a lot of emotional angst. And I don't know if your parents have looked at their final wishes and, told you guys what they want as far as, what does a good end of life look like? What does a good death look like? That if you have 11 siblings trying to guess what mom and dad want, you can have a big family fight right there, right? So you've got an emotional and a financial burden from older family members that can't take care of themselves. And then, so that has affected, it's like a $23 billion loss of productivity in this country. And we're also in the largest wealth transfer that's ever occurred in the history of mankind, with a 70% failure rate. And so, there's this huge issue around aging and death and money and harmony, and looking at our family as a business and living our lives fully. It's an exciting time that we could really impact what we do, and it's done one family at a time.
Yep, absolutely. I 1000% agree, guys. This is why I brought her on here, because she's incredible. Her mission and her vision's incredible, and everybody needs this. Like, everybody needs to be thinking more long term and be exposed to this information. So I'm curious, though, what do you feel is holding you back from reaching the next level of your legacy today?
You're talking about me?
Yeah, you.
I will tell you that in the past, it was playing too small, right? And this is, such a new, people don't want to hear about, death and aging and money. But so in the past, it was really a lack of confidence of that this really will make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what's the hardest thing you've ever accomplished?
It's a work in progress.
Okay, perfect.
And I'm an avid reader, and a book that, and I don't know if you mind me giving a plug about,
go for it.
It's called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And it's a deal changer.
Who's that
one? And it's a group of people. But so in answer to your question, my goal is to live above the line of consciousness as often as I can. You talked about being integrity and crossing that line. This 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, they make life super simple. At courage and above, you're living in consciousness. Anything below that, and they use the scale of consciousness and emotional scale based on scientific input. So my goal is to be above the line of consciousness. That's the best decision, and one of the most difficult ones that I have is to live above the line of consciousness.
I love it. I'm excited to read the book. Anything about leadership. It's one of the things I'm working on most in my life right now, is developing myself as a leader. So love it. What is the greatest success to this point in your life?
The greatest success that I have is really learning to, and it kind of goes back to what you said, learning to love someone who doesn't love me back. And that came out of the family dynamics. I've got 2 of my relationships healed with my brothers. The third one, I have no hope during this lifetime, but he's given me the gift that I can love someone who doesn't love me back.
That's awesome. I love it. That's inspiring. What are 2 or 3 books that you would recommend to the Fuel Your Legacy audience?
I have to say, I'm going to give a shameless plug for my own, right? Cracking the Inheritance Code is available. All my books are available on Amazon.com. Cracking the Inheritance Code is about building your personal legacy, and it's got all kinds of great information in there. And so that'd be a place I start. And then, as far as the technical, I have spent, I don't know, thousands of hours studying my field. And I could recommend, some of those legacy books, but why, when I've distilled, a decade of information into what I do? I specifically write my books easy to understand. Right. I don't want anybody to have to, I call them $5 words. I don't need a $5 word when a nickel word will do. So I write very simply, very easily. And so, the 2 books, I would do the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, because it's really, the title should be the 15 Commitments of Conscious Living. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bet. So I'm excited to read that one a lot. So what's the secret habit, mindset, or behavior that you feel like you've adopted in your life that could really benefit us and help us adopt it in our lives?
I think it's what I mentioned before. Life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And the gratitude, I actually have a morning routine, an evening routine, and a health routine. And the morning routine it's the miracle morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wake up, exercise, have silence, write, visualization, affirmations. That just sets your day up right. But then in the evening, I do a gratitude journal every night. And then I look at the next day and I set my top 3 frogs that I'm going to do the next morning. And then I set my intention. I believe that life can be lived with ease and grace. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tested by walking 500 miles across Spain with plantar fasciitis. So that's a fun one. I mean, the My Camino, My Life, if you want to know what it's like to do the Camino, that's a great book. But, really having a solid morning and evening routine can change your life, really can transform your life.
Agreed. I love it. So here's the final question. This is honestly my favorite question. The reason I do the whole show is really to hear this answer. And one day they'll get compiled into a book, the answers to all these questions. But we have to pretend that you've died, that you've passed on. And now we're 6 generations from now. So not 3, but 6. So this is your great grandchildren. They're sitting around a table discussing the life that you lived, the impact you had, and the legacy you left. What do you want them to be saying about the legacy, your legacy, in 6 generations from now?
Well, they're going to call me Elmo because that's my grandmother name. My oldest grandson couldn't say Oma. So they're going to say Elmo.
Okay, I love it.
Gave us the gift of developing our genius to share with the world to make it a better place.
Awesome. I love it. And not just them, but the whole world. She gave everybody the same gift, which I'm excited for to learn more about. So thank you so much for hopping on our show and sharing with us this incredible knowledge. So much stuff. You guys are going to have to re-listen to that because she shared a lot of statistics that she didn't have time to share all the backing up of, but they're real. And it's a real thing right now. The importance of starting to become conscious of this and applying it into the next generations, because it's something that I don't think people understand how bad it can be in the next few years. There's millions more people now than there were during the Great Depression, billions more people now than there were during the Great Depression. And it likely won't be isolated to America next time. When the next thing happens, it's going to be a lot more globally widespread than now, just because of as countries, we're more intertwined and interconnected than ever before. So it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. So get excited, but start doing what you can to make an impact and change right now. So thank you so much, Cindy, and we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.